He joined Google in 2007 to kickstart its business in emerging markets, and over a period of 6 years started close to half of Google's operations worldwide. In 2013, he moved to Google's infamous innovation arm, Google X, where he led a variety of projects, including providing affordable internet to all people, revolutionizing wind energy generation, self-driving cars, and more. He's the author of Solve for Happy: Engineering Your Path to Joy. Through his 12-year research on the topic of happiness, he created an algorithm and a repeatable, well-engineered model to reach a state of uninterrupted happiness regardless of the circumstances of life. His mission currently is to deliver his happiness message to 10 million people around the world. It is an honor to have Mo Gawdat with us here on Happier Talk. Mo, thank you very much for being here on Happier Talk. So tell us a little bit about your story, how you got interested in the topic of happiness.
I'm your typical executive, if you want. At a very young age, in my late 20s, I was extremely successful. Life gave me everything that I could wish for. And the more life gave me, the more miserable I became. A very common story, if you want, for people who try to find their happiness outside of themselves. And being a Middle Eastern and, with therapy not being an option, I had to sort of find my way out of my unhappiness by reading my way through. And I tried to get to every publication, every book, every lecture that I could find on the topic, but it just did not speak to my brain. For almost the first 2.5 years of my research, being an engineer, being an executive, target-driven, I sort of resisted the concept of do this and you'll be happy. I wanted to understand what was wrong with the machine. I wanted to understand why is this working and why is it working temporarily? Why does my unhappiness come back and so on? And so to go through this, I started to approach the topic of happiness from a very untraditional point of view. I started to look at it as an engineer. I started to define the problem statement as an engineer would do. I started to define the target, what happiness is as an engineer would do. Started to use, arbitrary data, line fitting, equations and charts and, unusual approaches to try and understand what I was facing. And I tried to develop a model that was repeatable, if you want. Something like a piece of software that you can run every time and it would make you happy if you're unhappy. Which worked. For years I was a very content, happy young man, and that turned out to be my training, if you want, because unfortunately around 2.5 years ago my son, who was 21 and a half at the time, was prescribed with an appendectomy, a very simple surgical operation, and the doctors made several mistakes in a row, and we lost Ali, our son, in around 4 hours. He was gone. And before Ali left, he actually sort of knew, even though it was an unexpected death, that he was leaving. He sat us all down as a family and he told us how much he loved us and how much he appreciated what we've given him through his life. And then he asked each of us to do something. And because of my long Google career, where I actually, was lucky enough to make a difference to the world by launching Google in almost half of the world, Ali basically said, I like what you're doing, but I want you to rely on your heart a little more. So sort of, it's not all about the business. Wow. And so, after his memorial, where the event was actually a reasonably happy event, and we were not angry or crying or cursing life, most of my friends said, you should probably write what you know. And so I sat down and I wrote a book that I think the universe has been conspiring to make better. And so the book is launching here today. It's an engineer's approach to happiness. And most of the time when I speak publicly to people about it, it registers on a different side than just the mindfulness, meditation, and other means of happiness side.
Wow. So how do you solve for happiness?
I wish it was that easy. As a matter of fact, it is a very, very comprehensive engineering problem to solve. The challenge, so I start with what I call the happiness equation. I start by defining happiness, right? And you need to understand when happiness occurs and when it doesn't, because when you do, then you know what you're solving for. And happiness, in a very interesting way, my happiness equation is happiness is equal to or greater than the way you think of the events of your life minus your expectation of how life should behave. You look at every single event in your life, including this one, and you say, oh, this Mo guy is talking a little better or a little worse than I expected, then this is meeting my expectations or missing my expectations. If he's talking less than I expected, then you would be unhappy. If he's talking as or better than you expected, you will feel happy, okay? With that equation in mind, you can solve happiness in a very interesting way. You can either, you need to understand why is it that we get the mismatch between events and expectations, even though people like you and I actually have a very fortunate life. Most people in the world who will be able to watch this online are people who have a screen and a device and an internet connection and probably a means to become, to have a reasonable life, even though it sometimes has harshness.
This is something that economists, for example, distinguish between absolute wealth and relative wealth. Your absolute wealth can go up, but if your relative wealth doesn't go up, then your expectations don't meet.
Exactly. It's almost as if the goalposts keep moving further and further away. The more you reach, every time you reach the goal, they move the goal back a little bit. And so I started to dig deeper into what breaks that equation, and I realized that the way we set our view of events and the way we set our expectations, the way we solve the equation is blurred, if you want, by what the modern world makes us learn. So we learn to go through life in a way that makes us successful. And to be able to do that, we have to learn certain skills, certain concepts in a way that are actually not at all true. They're not exactly what they are in reality, but we have to learn to deal with them. For example, we think that we're our thoughts, right? That I think, therefore I am becomes the motto of our life. We glorify thought. But the way I discuss it in Solve for Happy is thought is just a biological function. It's a survival function, just like your heart pumping blood around your body, right? And when you see it that way, you start to behave differently. There are 6 grand illusions, 6 of that sort: thought, time, control, and so on, where as we engage through life looking at those illusions and using those illusions to solve our happiness equation, we're very frequently unhappy. If you remove those illusions, you start to solve the equation a little more appropriately. But then you face another challenge, that this brain of ours has been developed in the caveman years. It has 7 features that were extremely important for survival that have turned into blind spots in the modern world, right? So the way you actually look at life is not at all what life is. You could look at life and say, I'm stuck in traffic for half an hour, and you see this as a bad event, right? But you're in an air-conditioned car in one of the most, the most economically prosperous countries in the world, and you're actually going from one place to another in 45 minutes. If you had walked it would have been 4.5 hours, right? And you filter out the truth. You don't see the truth, right? And so by fixing the 6 grand illusions and the 7 blind spots, you can solve the equation a lot more appropriately most of the time. And when you do, you come to a very interesting realization that life almost always meets expectations. That there are truths to the world and the way the world operates. The universe operates, in my personal view, based on 5 ultimate truths. If you understand those truths and integrate them in every event of your life, you probably don't even need to solve the equation anymore, because life will always meet your expectation and you will always be happy.
So this is fascinating. What the Buddhists would argue, they would say, well, don't have expectations. Do you think that's possible?
I always get that from achievers as a comment that, of course, if you give me 2 sides of the equation, I'll minimize the expectation side and I'll be happy. And yeah, I'll tell you, it will work. If you have no expectations, life will always meet your expectations and you'll be happy, but you'll be mediocre in life. The thing is, we're here for a purpose. Each and every one of us is here to achieve something, okay? To contribute to the universe, to contribute to humanity, to all of being, right? And including yourself, right? And you don't want to live a life that's mediocre. You want to live a life that's successful. So you set realistic expectations is one side, so that you're somewhere between stretching yourself to succeed and really not setting yourself up for disappointment. But more importantly, it's what you do when expectations are missed that determines your happiness or unhappiness. Do you sit down and dwell and cry and say, I'm the worst person on earth, or do you simply say, okay, life is bigger than I am. I tried, I gave it the best I could, and it didn't work out, so I'm going to reset and try again, and reset and try again, and reset and try again.
Right. Just to add to what you said, I would say that part of happiness is having a sense of purpose, which actually means having expectations.
Yeah, I have a very controversial view of that. I actually think that you will find your sense of purpose in your happiness. It's almost as if you know those tuning forks when you're tuning your guitar and you hit it and it will make the sound of E every time. It's natural resonance of that fork is E, right? And that is us as humans. What you're truly made for, it happens. You execute on with no effort. Okay, your purpose is the path through which you would enjoy doing rather than force yourself to do.
Yes, that's interesting. So Parker Palmer, who's a renowned educator and one of my mentors, talks about how you need to listen to the voice of your vocation.
Yeah.
So to listen to that E or F or whatever your vocation is.
And as Malcolm Gladwell says, if you want to be the best in the world at something, you do 10,000 hours of it. And what's the best way to do 10,000 hours of anything is to love it.
Something that you're passionate about.
To be happy doing it. Yeah.
Well, Mo, I'm very happy that you found your vocation in what you're doing, bringing happiness to the world. Thank you.
Thank you.